The fungal sample smelled like wet copper and rotting leaves. Diane Harlow loved it. She had spent 3 weeks cultivating this particular specimen, watching its network spread through the soil like purple lightning frozen in dirt. Her lab was quiet except for the hum of environmental controls and the soft scratch of her stylus against her datapad. She did not hear the door open behind her. "Diane Harlow," a voice said. "Cold. Official. You will come with us." She turned to find 4 Velis security officers filling her doorway. Their gray skin caught the lab lights, and their uniforms bore the golden seal of the Consortium High Council. This was not station security. This was something bigger. "Can I wash my hands first?" she asked. They did not let her wash her hands. The walk to the council chamber took 15 minutes. Diane counted her steps out of habit. 2,347 steps through corridors that grew increasingly grand. The walls shifted from functional metal to polished stone carved with the history of 12 species working together in peace. She had always found those carvings somewhat optimistic. The council chamber was enormous. 12 curved benches rose in a semicircle, each representing a member species of the Galactic Consortium. Hundreds of officials, journalists, and observers filled the gallery seats. Every eye turned to Diane as she was led to the central platform. High Arbiter Solon stood at the prosecutor's podium. He was Velith like the guards, but older, his gray skin marked with the dark spots of advanced age. His robes cost more than Diane's yearly salary. She had met him twice before at formal functions. Both times, he had looked at her like she was something stuck to his shoe. "Diane Harlow," Solon announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "You stand accused of sabotaging atmosphere processors on Colony Verdun 4. Your actions resulted in the deaths of 217 innocent beings." The crowd murmured. Diane felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face still. "I request to see the evidence," she said. "You will see it now." Holographic displays flickered to life around her. Maintenance logs with her digital signature. Communication records showing her access to the processor systems. Financial transfers to accounts she had never seen before. It was all fake. She knew it was fake because she had spent the last 6 months filing reports about those exact processors being dangerously neglected by their actual maintenance contractor, that a contractor owned by Solon's family. "This is fabricated," Diane said clearly. "I reported problems with those processors. I have the original files. Someone altered the records." "Of course you would say that," Solon replied. His voice dripped with practiced sorrow. "The guilty always claim innocence. But the evidence speaks for itself. Then let an independent investigation speak for itself, too." Solon's eyes narrowed slightly. She had backed him into a corner. An investigation might find the truth. He could not allow that. "The crime is too severe for standard proceedings," he declared. 217 souls cry out for justice. "I invoke the ancient right of the proving." Silence crashed through the chamber like a physical weight. Diane did not know what the proving was, but she could read the room. Several council members had gone pale. Others looked away. Whatever this meant, it was bad. "The proving has not been invoked in 40 cycles. One council member protested. "The law still stands," Solon replied. "Unless this council wishes to void the traditions that bind us." No one spoke against him. The political cost was too high. Ancient laws carried ancient weight. "Then it is decided." Solon turned to Diane with something like triumph in his eyes. "You will be transported to the proving grounds in 3 days. May the ancestors judge you fairly." The guards led her away before she could respond. Her holding cell was comfortable enough. A bed, a sink, a small window showing stars. Captain Yolanda Reyes visited within the hour, her dark face tight with controlled fury. "I'm going to fight this," Reyes said. "I've already contacted legal advocates across 6 systems." "What is the proving?" Diane asked. Reyes hesitated. That hesitation told Diane everything she needed to know. "It's an old tradition," Reyes finally said. "You're dropped on a hostile world with minimal supplies. You have to reach a designated point within a time limit. If you survive, you're innocent. If you die, then I'm guilty." "Convenient. No one has survived in 40 cycles, Diane." Diane nodded slowly. She walked to the small window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out, there was a moon waiting to kill her. Somewhere out, there was also Earth, the planet that had shaped her ancestors through ice ages, plagues, predators, and disasters that would make most species extinct. "I need you to do something for me," Diane said. "Anything. My quarters. Third storage locker. There's a pair of brown hiking boots. Worn out, ugly as sin. I want them brought here." Reyes stared at her. "Boots? Those boots have walked through Alaskan wilderness, Yellowstone backcountry, and the Patagonian ice fields. They've kept me alive through 3 situations that should have killed me." Diane turned from the window. Her eyes were calm. "I'm going to need them again." That night, a Keshri legal advocate named Rin visited her cell. Rin's scales shimmered blue-green under the lights, and her professional demeanor barely hid her curiosity about the strange human who was about to die. "I have been assigned to ensure your rights are observed during the proving," Rin explained. "I must inform you that the survival rate is 0% over the last 40 cycles." Diane pulled on her hiking boots. They fit perfectly, molded to her feet by years of hard use. "What's the terrain like?" she asked. Rin blinked. Of all the questions she had expected, that was not one of them. "Hostile," Rin said. "Extremely hostile." Diane smiled. "Good. I'd hate for this to be boring." The shuttle shook as it dropped through clouds the color of rust and poison. Diane sat strapped into her seat, watching the viewport with the focus of someone memorizing every detail. The 2 Veleth guards beside her kept exchanging glances. They had transported condemned prisoners before. None of them had ever looked this calm. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot announced. Diane checked her equipment one final time. The proving rules allowed minimal survival gear. She had a knife with a fixed blade, a small water purifier, an emergency beacon, and the clothes on her back. The beacon was a cruel joke. Press it, and rescue would come. Press it, and you admitted guilt. No one had ever pressed it. Everyone had died instead. The shuttle touched down on blackite rock that crunched under its landing struts. Orange light filtered through the toxic atmosphere, casting everything in shades of fire and rust. The air outside was breathable but thin. Every movement would cost her more energy than normal. The rear hatch opened. Dry heat rolled in like a wave. "Diane Harlow," one guard said formally, "you have 15 days to reach the Temple of Judgment. The distance is 400 kilometers. Broadcast drones will document your journey. May the ancestors judge you fairly." She stepped out onto the surface of Harrow. 7th, the shuttle lifted off immediately, leaving her alone on a ridge overlooking a vast dead landscape. Jagged rock formations stretched toward the horizon. Pools of liquid glinted in the valleys below, their surfaces too still and too bright to be water. The sky held no clouds, only that endless orange haze. Diane did not move. The guards had expected her to panic. Salin, watching from his comfortable office on the station, expected her to run blindly into the wilderness. The billions of viewers tuning into the broadcast expected entertainment. Instead, she sat down on a rock and watched. For 2 hours, she simply observed. She noted which direction the thin wind came from. She watched small creatures scuttle between rocks, marking their paths, their timing, their behavior. She studied the way light moved across the land, identifying shaded areas that might offer cooler temperatures. She found a pool of liquid nearby and tested its edges with her knife. The metal sizzled and corroded. Acid. The pretty pools were death traps. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, temperatures started dropping fast. Diane had expected this. Thin atmospheres meant extreme temperature swings. The day had been hot enough to kill through dehydration. The night would be cold enough to kill through exposure. She needed shelter, and she needed it soon. The rock formations offered possibilities. She found a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders, deep enough to block wind and retain body heat, wide enough to escape if something tried to trap her inside. She gathered dry vegetation from nearby and created a simple bedding layer to insulate herself from the cold stone. Then she made a fire. It was small and carefully contained. The dry plants burned fast and hot, and she fed it slowly through the night. When the temperature dropped below freezing, her shelter stayed warm enough to survive. In his office, Solon frowned at the broadcast feed. She should be dead by now. His aide shifted uncomfortably. The viewership numbers are increasing, sir. People are interested in watching her. They're interested in watching her die. That's the point. But Diane did not die that night. Or the next out on the second day, she discovered the local predators. They were six-legged things with bodies like armored dogs and heads that were mostly jaw. She spotted their tracks near a water source she had identified, a natural spring where the liquid was merely mineral-heavy rather than acidic. She watched them hunt. They worked in packs, using heat signatures to track prey. Their eyes were small and weak, but their other senses were sharp. Diane returned to a cold spring she had found earlier. The water there was frigid, fed by some underground source. She coated herself in the mineral-rich mud from its banks, covering every inch of exposed skin. The mud was cold and uncomfortable. It also masked her heat signature completely. That night, a pack of predators passed within 10 meters of her position. They sniffed the air, confused. Their prey detection instinct screamed that something was there, but their senses found nothing. Eventually, they moved on. Diane allowed herself a small smile in the darkness that on the third day, she began moving toward the temple. She traveled during the early morning and late evening, when temperatures were survivable and predators were less active. During the hottest hours, she rested in whatever shade she could find. During the coldest hours, she sheltered and conserved energy. She covered 30 kilometers on day 3, 35 on day 4. The terrain was brutal, but she had trained on brutal terrain her entire adult life. Alaska had prepared her for cold. The Arizona desert had prepared her for heat. The Rocky Mountains had prepared her for elevation and thin air. Earth had spent millions of years trying to kill her ancestors. It had failed. This moon was no different. On the station, Counselor Wren pulled up data files on human homeworld conditions. What she found made her scales turn pale. Gravity, crushing. Atmosphere, full of allergens and pathogens. Climate, wildly unstable. Native life, almost universally hostile. Natural disasters, constant. And somehow, humans had not just survived there. They had thrived. They had spread across their entire planet, adapting to every environment from frozen tundra to burning desert. Harrow 7 was dangerous. Earth was worse. Wren watched the latest broadcast feed. Diane was building a trap to catch small creatures for food. She worked with calm efficiency, her hands steady, her movements precise. There was no panic in her, no despair. She was not just surviving. She was settling in. "What are you?" Wren whispered to the screen. Diane could not hear her, but somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew the answer. She was human, and humans did not break easily. Finn had drawn the worst shift again. Overnight monitoring duty meant sitting alone in the broadcast control room, watching feeds of condemned prisoners slowly dying on Harrow 7. It was boring work. It was depressing work. Most prisoners lasted 2 or 3 days before the moon claimed them. This human was on day 4, and she had just caught a fish. Finn leaned forward, his Tolari features scrunching in confusion. The creature she pulled from the acidic stream was not exactly a fish. It was more like an armored eel with too many fins. But she had caught it using a spear she made from sharpened rock and a straight branch. And now she was cooking it over a small fire while the broadcast drones circled overhead. "How did you know that thing was edible?" Finn muttered to himself. He pulled up the previous footage. 12 hours ago, she had watched local predators hunt near the same stream. When they ate something and did not die, she marked it as potentially safe. She had spent an hour observing the eels, learning their patterns, before crafting her spear. Finn had seen many prisoners on Harrow 7. None of them had ever thought to do that. Across the galaxy, viewership numbers were breaking records. The proving had always attracted audiences who enjoyed watching the guilty suffer. But this was different. This was not suffering. This was a masterclass in survival, and billions of beings were tuning in to watch. On day 5, Diane encountered her first major predator. It was bigger than the pack hunters, a solitary ambush specialist that lurked in rock formations and dropped on prey from above. She spotted its hiding place by noticing the absence of small creatures in the area. The beast lunged. Diane did not run. She stood tall, spread her arms wide, and produced a sound from deep in her chest. It was low and rumbling, almost like a growl, but stranger. The predator froze mid-lunge, confused. Its echolocation was receiving contradictory signals. This small creature should be prey, but it was not acting like prey. It was not fleeing. It was not cowering. For 10 seconds, human and alien predator stared at each other. Then the beast retreated, slinking back into the rocks to find easier targets. Finn realized he had stopped breathing during the encounter. Impossible, he whispered. That's impossible. What had happened? The footage was clear. A human had faced down one of Harrow 7's apex predators through sheer force of will. The consortium public networks exploded with debate. Some claimed the human must be cheating somehow. Others argued that the footage proved humans were more dangerous than anyone had realized. A small but growing group began questioning whether Diane was actually guilty at all. High Arbiter Solon watched these developments with growing concern. The proving was supposed to be a spectacle of justice. It was supposed to end with the guilty dying alone and unmourned. Instead, it was turning the human into a celebrity. The drones, he said to his aide, can they be adjusted to guide predators toward her position? The aide hesitated. That would be against proving protocol, sir. I'm asking if it can be done, not whether it should be. In another part of the station, Captain Reyes was making progress. She had obtained copies of the original maintenance logs from Verdun, the ones that showed the real cause of the processor failures. The evidence clearly pointed to negligence by the maintenance contractor, not sabotage by Diane. But Solon's allies controlled the courts. Every attempt to present new evidence was blocked by procedural delays. The trial could not be reopened until the proving concluded, and the proving only concluded one of two ways: survival or death. Counselor Rin visited Reyes privately. I want to help, Rin said. Her scales had lost their professional blue-green shimmer. Now they showed the mottled pattern of stress and uncertainty. I was assigned to observe the proving, but what I'm observing is not what I expected. What did you expect? A soft creature dying quickly. Humans have no claws, no armor, no venom. Your species should be prey. Rin's voice dropped. Instead, I'm watching something that terrifies me. Reyes almost smiled. Welcome to humanity. On Harrow 7, night fell again. Finn was still at his monitoring station. He was supposed to have left hours ago, but he could not look away. Diane had found a defensible position in a small canyon and was preparing for sleep. On impulse, Finn opened his microphone. Technically, he was not supposed to communicate with proving subjects, but the rule said nothing about ambient noise. He started playing music. Soft Tolari melodies, the kind his mother used to sing when he was young. The broadcast was one way. Diane could not respond. But if she was close enough to a drone, she might hear it. On the surface, Diane paused. Through the thin atmosphere, carried by the hovering drone nearby, came the faint sound of alien music. It was strange and beautiful and utterly unexpected. She looked up at the drone. She could not see who was watching. She could not know why they were doing this. But for the first time since landing on this moon, she felt something other than survival instinct. She felt less alone. Diane raised one hand toward the drone. A simple wave. Acknowledgement that someone out there cared whether she lived or died. In the control room, Finn waved back. She could not see it, but somehow it felt like she knew. Day 6 began with a warning. Storm systems were forming on the far side of the moon. Massive weather events that would reach Diane's position within hours. The automated alert systems gave her the information directly. Severe atmospheric disturbance approaching. Estimated arrival, 4 hours. Seek immediate shelter. Survival probability in open terrain, 2%. Diane studied the horizon. She could see the storm coming now, a wall of orange and black churning across the sky. It was enormous. It was deadly. She started walking toward it. Finn nearly fell out of his chair. What is she doing? But Diane knew exactly what she was doing. The storm would drive every creature on the moon into shelter. If she could find where they hid, she could find safety too. Animals always knew where to go when disaster approached. She followed a group of small creatures as they scrambled toward a distant cliff face. They disappeared into a cave entrance that she never would have found on her own. The storm hit as she ducked inside. Behind her, the world turned to screaming wind and acid rain. Inside the cave, it was dark and quiet. But she was alive, and she was not alone. Somewhere deeper in the darkness, she heard breathing. Something big, something wounded. Diane drew her knife and moved toward the sound. The creature in the darkness was a juvenile. Diane realized this as her eyes adjusted to the cave's dim light. It was one of the six-legged pack hunters she had encountered before, but smaller, thinner, clearly young, and clearly hurt. A deep gash ran along its flank. Old blood matted its armor-like hide. It had probably been injured in a territorial fight and left behind by its pack. It snarled at her approach, but the sound was weak. Tired, dying, Diane should have killed it. The logical move was to end the threat and claim the deeper cave for herself. Every survival manual would tell her to eliminate potential dangers. Instead, she put away her knife. "Easy," she said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature did not understand her words, but it understood her tone. The snarl faded to a low whimper. Outside, the storm raged with enough fury to strip flesh from bone. In here, two predators from different worlds watched each other in the darkness. Diane moved slowly. She pulled water from her purifier and poured some into a depression in the rock floor. The juvenile sniffed at it suspiciously, then drank. She took strips of dried meat from her pack, food she had prepared from previous hunts, and placed them within the creature's reach. It ate. For 3 days, the storm trapped them together. Diane rationed her supplies carefully, sharing what she had with the wounded juvenile. She cleaned its wound using water and improvised bandages torn from her clothing. The creature let her touch it, though its muscles tensed with each contact. By the second day, it had stopped growling at her entirely. The broadcast drones had followed her into the cave, but the storm interfered with their signals. Viewers across the galaxy saw only static and occasional glimpses of Diane tending to the wounded predator. Salen's allies tried to cut the feeds entirely, claiming technical difficulties made the broadcast unwatchable. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. "Bring back the human feeds" became a trending phrase on every major network. Millions of beings who had tuned in expecting to watch a criminal die were now invested in watching her survive. They wanted to see what happened next. In the broadcast control room, Finn worked overtime to boost signal strength. He bounced the feed through 3 different relay stations, sacrificing quality for consistency. The images were grainy, but they showed enough. Diane was talking to the juvenile predator, telling its stories, maybe singing songs. The creature listened with its head tilted, like a dog hearing a familiar voice. "She's bonding with it," Finn muttered in disbelief. "She's actually bonding with a hero predator." Counselor Rin had snuck into the control room to watch. That should not be possible. Those creatures are pure instinct. They don't form social bonds outside their packs. Humans form bonds with everything, Finn replied. "I've been researching them. They domesticated wolves on their homeworld. Wolves, apex pack predators. They turned them into companions." Rin stared at the screen. "What kind of species does that?" "The kind that survives anything." On the 3rd day, the storm began to fade. Diane prepared to leave the cave, but she faced a problem. The juvenile was healing, but it was not strong enough to hunt on its own yet. If she left it here, it would starve. She spent an hour thinking about it. Then she made a decision. She would not leave it. The juvenile followed her to the cave entrance. When she stepped out into the pale morning light, it hesitated at the threshold. Outside was danger. Outside was the world that had nearly killed it. Diane waited. She did not call to it or try to lure it. She simply waited, letting the creature make its own choice. After a long moment, the juvenile stepped out of the cave. They traveled together. It was strange at first. The creature kept its distance, following but not approaching. But as the hours passed, it grew bolder. By evening, it walked beside her. By the next morning, It slept curled against her back, sharing body heat through the cold night. The broadcast viewership hit an all-time record. On day 9, they reached a ridge overlooking the final stretch of terrain before the Temple of Judgment. Diane could see the ancient structure in the distance, a tower of dark stone rising from the landscape like a monument to suffering. Between her and the temple lay the feeding grounds. Even from this distance, she could see why it had earned that name. The terrain was a maze of canyons and caves, perfect ambush territory. Bones littered the ground like scattered toys. This was where the apex predators of Harrow 7 came to hunt, and where most proving subjects came to die. The juvenile pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. "I know," Diane said quietly. "I don't like it either." Back on the station, Captain Reyes had finally assembled enough evidence to challenge Salin's case. Financial records showing his family's ownership of the faulty maintenance company. Communication logs proving he had known about the dangerous conditions. Testimony from workers who had been pressured to falsify reports. But the courts remained closed until the proving ended. "She has to survive," Reyes told Rin. "If she dies, the case dies with her." Salin walks free. Rin nodded grimly. "Then we have to hope she's as remarkable as she appears." On Harrow 7, Diane studied the feeding ground with the careful eye of someone who had spent a lifetime reading dangerous terrain. She noted the wind patterns, the sight lines, the places where predators might hide. The juvenile watched her, waiting for guidance. "Okay," Diane said finally. "Here's what we're going to do." She began walking down toward the maze of death below. The juvenile followed without hesitation. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Salin received the report with cold satisfaction. The broadcast drones in the feeding grounds had experienced a mysterious malfunction. Technical issues, his people claimed. Completely unavoidable. "How long until they're repaired?" Salin asked. "At least 48 hours, sir." "Unfortunate." Salin allowed himself a small smile. "By then, the human will be dead, and no one will see how it happened." What Salin did not know was that Diane had already entered the feeding grounds, and she had already sensed that something was wrong. The drones had stopped following her. For 9 days, they had been constant companions, buzzing overhead like mechanical vultures. Now they hung motionless in the air, their lights dark, their cameras blind, and no witnesses. No proof of what happened here. Diane understood immediately. Someone wanted her dead, and they wanted it to happen in the dark. "Stay close," she whispered to the juvenile. The feeding grounds lived up to their name. Every shadow held potential death. Every rock formation could hide an ambush predator. The ground was soft with old bones and dried blood, a carpet of previous victims who had walked this same path. Diane moved like a ghost. Years of wilderness training had taught her how to step without sound, how to use terrain for cover, how to read the subtle signs of predator activity. The juvenile followed her lead, its 6 legs making no more noise than falling leaves. They made it 2 kilometers before the pack found them. These were not ordinary hunters. They were bigger, smarter, more coordinated than anything she had faced before. A dozen of them emerged from the rocks, moving in perfect formation to cut off every escape route. Diane drew her knife. The blade looked pathetically small. The pack circled. They were in no hurry. They had done this hundreds of times before. The prey always ran. The prey always died. It was simply a matter of time. Diane did not run. She watched them circle, reading their movements, identifying which one led the pack. It was the largest, a scarred veteran with notches torn from its armor and old wounds marking its body. The alpha. "Okay," Diane said quietly. "Let's dance." The alpha lunged. Diane sidestepped, slashing with her knife. The blade carved a shallow wound across its shoulder. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to hurt. Enough to make it angry. The pack charged as one that what followed was not a fight. It was a war of attrition. Diane used every trick she had learned in a lifetime of survival training. She created false trails, leading predators into each other. She climbed rock faces that their claws could not grip. She played dead, letting them pass by before striking from behind. She screamed. She growled. She made herself seem bigger and more dangerous than she was. The juvenile fought beside her. It was still young, still wounded, but it threw itself at the pack with desperate fury. It had found something worth fighting for, and it would not abandon her. Hours passed. Day turned to night, turned to day again. The pack lost 3 members to Diane's knife and the juvenile's claws. They lost 2 more to exhaustion, unable to maintain the pursuit. But the alpha would not give up. It kept coming, driven by hunger and wounded pride. Finally, Diane made her stand. She found a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders, a space just wide enough for her to slip through, but too small for the alpha to follow. She wedged herself into the gap and waited. The alpha approached. It could smell her blood, her sweat, her exhaustion. It knew she was trapped. IT forced its head into the gap, jaws snapping, trying to reach her. Diane grabbed its snout with her free hand. Her knife found its eye. The alpha screamed. It thrashed. It bucked to try to retreat. But Diane held on. She drove the knife deeper, twisting, destroying everything it touched. When it finally stopped moving, she pulled herself free from the gap and stood over its body. The remaining pack members watched from a distance. Their alpha was dead. The tiny soft creature had killed it. Diane raised her bloody knife and screamed. It was not a word in any language. It was pure sound, raw and primal and terrifying. It was the scream of something that had been hunted and had refused to die. The pack fled. Diane collapsed. Every muscle in her body burned with exhaustion. She was covered in blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Her knife had chipped and bent from the fight. Her clothing hung in tatters, but she was alive. The juvenile limped toward her and laid down at her side. Its wounds had reopened during the fight, but it was still breathing, still loyal. "Good boy," Diane whispered. "Good boy." In the broadcast control room, Finn had worked through the night trying to reboot the drone network. He had traced the malfunction to a deliberate override command, something that required high-level authorization. Someone powerful had wanted those drones down, but he bypassed the override. The drones came back online. The first image they captured was Diane standing over the alpha's body, screaming defiance at the retreating pack. The footage was immediately broadcast to billions of viewers. Solon watched in horror. That's impossible. That is impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. A human woman, armed with nothing but a knife and the will to survive, had defeated a pack of apex predators in their own hunting grounds. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. That on the morning of day 13, Diane rose. The Temple of Judgment was visible on the horizon. 2 days ahead of schedule, she began walking. Behind her, at a respectful distance, predators followed. They did not hunt her. They followed like an honor guard, marking the passage of something they did not understand but could not help but respect. The human was coming, and nothing would stop her now. The Temple of Judgment rose from the barren landscape like a fist of black stone. Thousands of beings had gathered around its base, arriving by shuttle from across the consortium. Officials, journalists, curious citizens, all drawn by something that had not happened in 40 cycles, that a survivor was coming. Diane walked out of the feeding grounds on the morning of day 13. Her clothing was torn and bloodstained. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises. She looked like she had crawled out of a war. Behind her walked the juvenile predator, fully healed now and moving with the confidence of a creature that had found its place in the world. Behind that, at a greater distance, walked a dozen other predators. They had followed her through the night, neither hunting nor fleeing. The crowd fell silent as she approached. No one had expected this. The proving was supposed to break its subjects. It was supposed to leave them dead and defeated, proof that the consortium's justice was absolute. Instead, this human walked in like a queen returning from conquest. High Arbiter Solon stood on the temple steps, his robes perfectly pressed, his expression carefully composed. But his hands trembled slightly, betraying his fear. "Diane Harlow," he announced, his voice carrying through amplification systems. "You have survived the proving. By ancient law, your innocence is weight." Solon's eyes narrowed. "What?" Diane climbed the temple steps slowly. Each movement cost her visible effort. She was running on willpower alone now, her body pushed far beyond its normal limits. But her voice was steady. Before you declare anything, she said, I want to hear you explain something. The crowd murmured. This was not how provings ended. Explain what? Solon demanded. Explain why the broadcast drones malfunctioned in the feeding grounds. Explain who authorized the override codes. Explain why someone wanted me dead in the dark where no one could see. Solon's composure cracked slightly. Technical difficulties or not, I have the authorization records. A new voice cut through the crowd. Counselor Rin stepped forward, her scales gleaming in the harsh light. Behind her walked Captain Reyes, carrying a datapad that glowed with evidence. Finn recovered the override logs. Rin continued. High Arbiter Solon personally authorized the drone shutdown. He wanted the human to die without witnesses. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Solon took a step back. And that's not all, Reyes said. We have the original maintenance records from Verdun 4. The atmosphere processors failed because of negligence by a company owned by Solon's family. He fabricated the sabotage evidence to cover up their responsibility. Lies, Solon hissed. This is all lies and slander. Then explain these financial transfers. Reyes held up her datapad. Explain these falsified inspection reports. Explain why every witness who tried to report the truth was reassigned or silenced. The crowd was no longer silent. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Solon had been respected, trusted. He had invoked the proving with the authority of his position, and he had done it to cover his crimes. Diane reached the top of the temple steps. She stood face to face with the man who had tried to murder her. The ancient laws of the proving include a clause, she said. If the accused survives and is proven innocent, the accuser takes their place. Solon's face went pale. No, you cannot. I'm a high arbiter. I have rights. I have connections. You had rights, Rin corrected. The moment you falsified evidence and tried to corrupt the proving, you forfeited them. Guards stepped forward, the same Velith security forces who had arrested Diane 13 days ago. They took hold of Solon's arms. He struggled, but he was old and soft, and they were strong. Please, he begged. Please, I'll give you anything. I'll confess. Just don't send me there. Diane watched him for a long moment. The man who had framed her. The man who had killed 200 people through negligence and then tried to hide it. The man who had sent her to hell expecting her to die. She could let him face the same fate. The law permitted it. Justice might even demand it. But Diane had spent 2 weeks fighting for her survival. She had faced predators and storms and darkness. She had bonded with a creature from a hostile world and turned it into a companion. She knew exactly what it took to survive Harrow. 7th Solon could not survive one day. Stop, she said. The guards paused. I don't need his death to prove my innocence, Diane said. The evidence already proves that. I'm not like him. I don't kill people to solve my problems. She turned to face the crowd, the journalists, the officials who had gathered to witness judgment. But know this. You sent me to that moon to break me. You thought a soft human would die quickly and quietly, and everyone could forget. Instead, you showed the entire galaxy what a human is. She gestured to the predators still waiting at the temple's base. The juvenile had climbed halfway up the steps and sat watching her with loyal eyes. We come from a world that tried to kill us for millions of years. It failed. We adapted. We endured. We made peace with the things that hunted us and turned them into friends. Diane's voice rang through the crowd. You cannot break us with trials. You can only show us what we're made of. Solon was taken away. He would face standard justice now, a real trial with real evidence. The courts would determine his fate. In the weeks that followed, the consortium abolished the proving. The ancient law was struck from the records, deemed incompatible with modern standards of justice. Counselor Rin wrote the legislation herself. Finn transferred to Captain Reyes's xenobiology department. He said he wanted to learn more about humans. Really, he just wanted to be near the remarkable species that had captured his attention. Diane returned to her work. She became famous across known space, but she did not let it change her. She still spent her days with soil samples and fungal networks, still preferred quiet labs to public attention. 1 year later, she returned to Harrow, 7. This time, She came voluntarily. She wanted to study the ecosystem that had tested her. She wanted to understand the creatures that had nearly killed her. As her shuttle landed, a shape emerged from the rocky terrain. 6 legs, armored hide, a familiar scar along its flank. The juvenile was fully grown now, a powerful adult predator in its prime. It approached Diane without fear and lay down beside her as she unpacked her equipment. "Hello, friend," she said softly. The predator made a sound like a rumbling purr. Diane took out her datapad and began recording observations. Around her, the hostile moon continued its eternal cycles. Acid pools glinted in the valleys. Wind howled through the canyons. Somewhere in the distance, pack hunters called to each other. But here, in this small space, a human and an alien predator existed in peace. The galaxy had learned something that year. They had learned that humans do not simply survive. They adapt. They endure. They turn enemies into allies and trials into triumph. And sometimes, against all odds, they make peace with the things that try to kill them.